And we're back, folks. Hi, I'm Mark Rudin. This is Nomad Boatbuilding. Today on the 2.4 meter project, we're going to continue where we left off building our cockpit hoop. Now, in the last episode, we had some mishaps with steam bending. We ran into some issues with the wood being too dry and also with the wood cooling off too quickly. Well, we worked our way through those problems. We found a solution, which is boiling in the bag or steaming in the bag. And that basically means we make a plastic bag into a steam box that allows us to clamp the part that we want to bend in its resting place or its final fitting place and steam it in place. Basically, we're making this a flexible steam box, if you will. Now, that worked great for us. That doesn't work for every single steam bending operation that you might encounter, though, so don't think that it is like the only way to steam bend something. And in many ways, it's kind of more awkward to do it in the bag than it is just using a steam box, but it all depends on the situation. So now in this episode, we have got this part out of the bag, and we have a little bit of fitting to do before we can glue it in place. So without further ado, let's get right onto that. Sit back, relax, let me take care of the work. All right, I need to mark this coaming lip for trimming. We need to create a nice little miter joint here. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to leave one side in place. I'm just going to take some scrap. Just got this, basically was the offcut from doing this, and I'm going to slide these two together, and I'm applying a little bit of pressure to make sure that this joint, that these two pieces are firmly up against this forward block. And with this other piece of material laying over top, I'm just going to take my pencil, flattened, and carefully scribe that line on there on both sides, inside and out. I can then join the dots between the extreme ends of that little marking, and that's the miter joint I need to cut, at least in one plane. The other plane is vertical. I can't mark that very easily, so I think that's going to have to happen when I cut it. I'll have to eyeball that, and then we'll do a little bit of fitting. Now that I've got one side done, what I can do is I can swap these two around. So bring that one down lower, bring this one up higher, clamp it in place so it's in its finished resting place, and then I take that same bit of material and I do the same thing again in the opposite direction. And I suppose I could be doing it with the stock itself. In fact, maybe we could try that. Yeah, that'll work okay. So now it's just a case of trying to cut this to fit properly, and that's going to be the tricky part. It might not be a terrible idea to have a center line on here that I can follow as a reference, but I think I'm just going to have to take my saw, eyeball it, stay proud of the line, and then we'll use some jiggery pokery to get it to fit together. So let me get a saw for that. Put a piece of plywood under there just to make sure I don't slip by accident. Now, this is really just a case of trying to carefully get this started. And of course, my saw is really trashed, which is frustrating. Trashed in the worst spot, too. Just going to put a bit of tape on here to try and keep myself from bashing that up too easily. A couple layers. keep getting hung up everywhere that my teeth are busted off here. I really got to try and fix this saw up one of these days. See how that looks so far. Beautiful. Now I'm still standing proud. That's expected. So now my job is to try and whittle down to that line. I got to be very careful about doing that. I can try with a block plane, but I think I'm going to have to move over to sandpaper fairly quickly. Getting closer. So this is called kerfing the joint. It's a good way of fitting certain joints so that they fit really cleanly, but it can be difficult to do. And the biggest difficulty is just holding the joint in the orientation you need it to be in while you do this cutting operation. Obviously, you know, I'd like to be able to hold it down there, but then I'm cutting into my fingers to do it, which means I got to hold it above. And it doesn't always work that well. Well, that is about as tight as I can possibly make it, I think. So that is going to have to do. Okay, my last job before I can pull this off is to I need to mark a spot that I can realign it to when I put it back on. So right now I'm just going to pull this off, and I want to leave this exposed to the air for probably overnight, maybe just to make sure that it's thoroughly dried on the face it's going to get glued. So this has been sitting overnight as it is, but it was soaking wet when I applied it here. So all these surfaces that are going to get glued, I want to make sure those are 100% dry. So we'll just put it to the side, and I'll probably do some pre-shaping on this, rounding it over on two edges before I apply it, or at least, yeah, well, I need a clamping edge. I'll probably just do one edge, the lower edge that I can't reach later on. And we'll just pop a clamp on here to make sure it holds its shape while it sits overnight. Carefully put it somewhere safe so we don't hurt those miters. I've rounded over the bottom of the cockpit coaming lip here. And I did that because it's not going to work to try and do it while it's on the boat. If you look at my laminate trimmer, the bearing projects far enough that it sticks out beyond the edge of the thickness of the lip material, and so there's no way I could cut this on the boat effectively. So we're doing it ahead of time. Now it is a dodgy thing trying to cut a little skinny piece of material like this with a router, especially when it's curved and we're worried about breaking it because we don't want to have to bend a second one. So one trick that I use for doing this is I'll use a piece of scrap to help create a bit of support. And so I'll work off the edge of the table, and the scrap is there to help support the edge of the router over here. If you can imagine trying to balance this router on one skinny little stick is kind of tricky. However, introduce a second one and it creates a platform to keep the router on there much more securely. So I did that, working my way all the way around. And this is a technique I use often when I'm putting moldings onto small skinny pieces of material, especially if I'm doing like canoe gunnels. I'll use both gunnels stacked against each other to create a more stable platform for the router to run on. Time to get this glued on. So I'm just going to quickly do a little wet out on the, start with the end grain there so it soaks up more. I've sanded out the coaming. It's got 2 coats of epoxy on it right now. You'll get another one after the lip is on, but this is my best opportunity to sand it out nicely. Once the lip is on, it gets a whole lot harder to work with. I'm going to tell you, after doing this boat, I'm going to look forward to doing a traditional build where I'm not using epoxy every day. Look forward to just nailing and screwing something together for a change. So I'm just going to quickly try and roll on my epoxy onto the coaming here. I can feel this epoxy getting hot already when I used pre-warmed resin, so I think I'm safe to pop a nail in here. Oh, I'm very nervous about doing that. Maybe we'll wait till I get it all clamped up first. Now, truth. Oh, where? Not. Damn it. Damn it. Somehow we've lost ground. I gotta walk this around with more clamps. Oh, that's annoying as hell. Well, not now I'm in. There's nothing I can do about it except fill that hole with epoxy and call it good. You saw it, I had it perfect. Don't know where I went wrong here. There's nothing I can do about it but patch it up. That really burns my britches. I've got the top of my coaming here cleaned off, and I want to add one more layer, and the reason for that is I want to cap all the end grain that we see in the coaming, and I want to give this a little bit more meat. And I couldn't really do that before without losing some height along the side where it's getting awfully low already, so I decided to do this. This also made it easier for me to bend this lip in place by having it being a smaller member. So I've made my first piece up already. I used a very simple technique where I laid a piece of stock over here and I've traced it on the inside and the outside, and of course just trimmed it to shape. And so I'm going to copy this piece that I've now fitted onto this other one, and we're going to put that in place. Now the miter here in the middle, we want that to look nice and clean. And the way I got that was simply using my little miter gauge here, and I eyeballed what looked like splitting this miter down the middle, and then I checked it by flipping it to the other side and ensuring that it was the same. That's a pretty short little miter, so if I'm out by a hair, that's not at the end of the world, and I can doctor that up by hand afterwards. I'd like the grain to match up on these two. These are a book-matched piece of material, so I'm going to use the offcut from the one just to help line up where I want this on the other. And of course, before I even put that on there, I should really just check this one on the coaming and make sure that it's going to fit. So as try as we might to make everything symmetrical, it may not be 100% the same. That looks pretty good. So I'm simply going to line these up, take that away, and now I'll trace out my part. Now I've left these parts rough on one edge, and I really should have made it the outside edge that's rough and the inside edge that's cleaner, because it's going to be easier to clean it up on the outside. So for this first one, we'll just leave it alone, but on the next ones, that as I move down the coaming, I think I'll switch my sides that I'm going to flush up. So note that I didn't bother marking the end of the miter. I'm going to clean this up first and get this fitting nicely, and then I'll use my miter gauge on that finished outside edge. For the first little section, I need the inside of my piece of material to be a nice fair line. I've cleaned up my edge with my plane, and I'm just going to cut that miter now. This miter's got a little angle to it. I'm just going to work that in by eye. That seems about right. I'll just go check it on the boat. It looks pretty good. I got to be careful that I've got my tail end sort of overhanging the lip enough that I can get trimmed back, and I'll check the miter after that. So I'm just a little bit strong, it looks like, and one side is just a little bit wider than the other because the pencil lines have grown, so I have to take that into account. The important thing is that I'm nice and tight right there at the inside corner, because that's what's going to show. The rest will all get trimmed off. We'll give that just a couple of strokes. We're almost there. Kind of feels like I need to give this one a little touch too. Looks like that'll work. Now I've got this other piece that I've made up. This is actually a chunk off the end of the same stick these were cut from. And I've done a board stretching technique where I've taken this one square piece, cut it on the diagonal, and flipped one side to make this new trapezoidal shape. So the one thing I want to do is make sure that the edges of this are beveled so they match that. That's pretty much how it's going to go. I got a little bit of fussing around to do. I really need to get something here locked down in place before I can properly fit the rest. So I'm going to have to make a choice as to what's going to get locked in there first, and figure out some way to make it permanent while I do the rest of the fitting. As I move forward here, I'm using the same little bird's mouth joints that I used on the covering boards, or the margins, if you want to call them that. And so I'm getting ready to fit my next piece in here. Now I've got a very limited amount of stock for this particular little detail, and that's just because I'm trying to keep it all consistent. So I had one stick that I've made a bunch of blanks out of, and I think I can squeeze it all out, but I got to be careful about making sure I maximize what I can get out of these sticks. So to that end, I'm just trying to decide how long to make each of these sections. My first one's about 19 inches. This one came in at about 16 inches, working off the scrap from it. And I'm just not sure what I want to do about the next one. If I make it 16, brings it to about here. And then I got one. Question is how many it takes me to get around this bend. And there's a little sweep in this particular grain here, which I'm using to my advantage. I'd like to throw that in there where it kind of matches the sweep of this coaming, I think. Be kind of nice. But so if I shift it down, I kind of lose that a little bit. Maybe I should shift it down. Let's see, where does 16 land? Roughly bar. Now, of course, the closer I am to straight, the more chance I have of using the outer portion of this to continue this, this sweep. In fact, I could potentially use the outer portion of this on the other side. I'm trying to build these book matched, but I don't absolutely have to, because you really can't see them side by side worth a damn. Actually, that grain sweeps in here pretty nicely right there. So maybe we'll do exactly that. Bring it down longer. So hard to decide. Okay, we'll go 16 and 16. So what I'm doing is I'm using just running these underneath the last one, like so, using it to help mark out the new one. So my bird's mouth is going to be there. Now it's very hard for me to reach underneath here to see what I'm doing. My pencil, Okay, that might be problematic. Let's try that. See, did I get it? Not so much. Okay, so what I'll have to do is just cut the inside and then use it, and then just offset that line to get the outside is what's going to have to happen here. Oh well, we tried. Alright, so I've cut the inside, and now I'm just going to use my finger as a guide to draw us a cut line for the outside. Well, I just ended up cutting this just a little oversized, I think, is what's going to happen, and then we'll worry about fitting it on the boat. Okay, so here's my part roughed in. So the inside curve looks good. The outside's a little fat, so I'm just going to, I think I'll just mark my bird's mouth here. So we'll go cut that. And it really feels like, you know, this dimension is probably about right. It's pretty consistent, so I could even take that right there and just carry it through. It's not a lot to take off, and I don't even have to take any of it off. I can just glue it and take it off afterwards. It's be fine. And then over here we've got the other end. I've marked where I want my bird's mouth to go. And I'm just square across the piece of material. Now the one thing I like to do is make sure that I've got sort of a finished width, and that's kind of important to me because I want that bird's mouth to land on the center. So to do that, I've got to make sure that I'm working from what will be the edges. So just use the 45-degree miter side of this and just bring it to the edges of this piece of stock. And a little bit just eyeball, see if whether or not this looks like it's, you know, running on center. And it's pretty close. I'll probably fudge it a little bit as I cut it. Okay, there we go. It's a reasonable fit. I'm not worrying about getting these like invisible because they're kind of a cool detail, and if you make them too tight, they just disappear, to be honest. But that's fun. I just don't want them to look like super sloppy. As long as both legs look the same kind of relief, that's fine. So that fits pretty good. So we'll just tape this down, and I'll move on doing the same thing. And I'm taping it, you know, right here by the bird's mouth, but then I'm taping it halfway and leaving this side springing free so that the next piece can fit in there. So I guess the one thing I want to think about is whether or not I can use this now to create a part for the other side. And I think it looks pretty good. Like, yeah, I can do that. So I'm going to do that, in fact, because I like this little sweeping grain, and they're not going to be an exact buck match, but that's okay. It saves me a piece of stock to make sure I get around there, so I don't go and use up another one, make another one of these pieces of scrap that may not do much for me down around the tighter curve where I want a little more width. So I'll just flip this guy over, and we'll cut it to shape. And I'll just cut it large and then go and check it out on the other side. In fact, I can even just take this piece over here and just slide it in there and have a look and see how it fits. You know, they're not exactly the same. I can see there's just a little difference here. So as long as I make it a bit over width, I can trim it to fit. So I'm just I'll mark the bird's mouth end here. And I'm just gonna mark the outside actually, because that's the one part I can't mark easily. So I'll just mark that, I'll cut that, and then we'll set it up on the other side, and I can scribe on the inside to get the inside of that curve. But this will get me as much as I need to replicate the other side reasonably. So here's the last of my little futtocks here. We call these futtocks. So they're all fitted, and so what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to start gluing this up, just starting back here and working my way forward, because I know all of these fit together nicely just the way they are, and I'd rather not disturb them. If I pull them all off now, the chances of them going all back together exactly so is kind of low. But if I just start gluing up right here and now, it should be just fine. So I'll just mix up a batch of epoxy, and I'll make it just kind of a bit on the wet side so that it saturates these guys at the same time as gluing them on. So there's our finished glue up. I just need to do a little cleanup here, knock off all the extra epoxy, and then we'll round over this lip so you get a nice looking 1/2 inch or so 5/8 round over here. And we'll round this over here as well. And we'll take this sharp pointy javelin here and we'll round that out as well, because we don't want that so sharp and pointy. We'll probably dub it off to a nice soft round over to kind of matches our cut water like this. Okay, I'm going to start dubbing down this little breast hook detail. I'll just use my plane here to do that. just a light stroke, and I let the heel of the plane rest on the coaming lip here to help control my angle. I'll stop when I get down close to it, leave a little bit of material behind, and then do the other side, and then I'll probably finish up with something like abrasives. Now in theory, when I get these two angles the same, I should just have a straight little peak right down the center here. So we've run the laminate trimmer over this molding inside and out. Now we're not done yet. This is just what the machine can do, which is not exactly a refined result. Now over on the other side, this is where the artistry starts coming into it. Once we're done with our machines, we start sculpting. And so this is just taken to an 80 grit right here. Just softened this whole profile, softened this little facet that was otherwise on the face. The lip under here is just slightly hard, and that's because we want water to get thrown off. So, but visually it looks soft. And then we're just going to wrap this around. Nice soft transition to the inside of the coaming here. Here you can see our bird's mouth joint and how that looks real nice, wrapping around this molding here like that. Throw a little moisture on there. Gives a nice little finish. Then up here at the bow, we've still got to roll this over a little bit. Trying to find an elegant transition from this breast hook down into the inside of the coaming here. It's a tough one. There's not much you can do when this is a sharp corner like this. This probably should have been a rounded contour, would have been nicer, but that's a whole pile more work too, so you got to pick your battles. And that's a wrap for this week, folks. That worked out really nicely. Now, we had some only minor mishaps with the fitting of that cockpit lip. Now, the reason that didn't work, despite the fact that I had a perfect fit, it's because we're using thickened epoxy. And that thickened epoxy takes up a tiny little bit of space, just enough to cause that lip to not want to come around and find its final resting place as it was when we were dry fitting it. Words is as hard. Lesson learned. I was maybe just too finicky when I was cutting it. I should have done a sloppier job or something like that. I don't know. It doesn't really matter because that little part is now buried. You really aren't seeing it as much as I like to make things perfecto. You can't always do that, and I honestly don't always get there. In fact, I rarely get there. Perfecto is a hard, high hill to climb. Anyhow, job's done. The cockpit lip is now finished, and that means that the major construction of our boat is done. We have one more big project that we need to do on the boat, but it's more of an assembly project, and we will save that for another episode. So until next time, keep your stick on the ice. Thanks everybody who helps to support this channel on Patreon and with your subscribes and shares and all that sort of stuff. You guys make this possible, and I appreciate all of you, and I'll see y'all later. Oh man, listen to me banging on and on and on and on and on and on.